Welcome you to our corporate time of worship and praise. David was right when he says, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Amen. Proverbs chapter 24, verses 3 to 4, if we can get that scripture. Proverbs chapter 24, verses 3 to 4. We welcome you if you're visiting with us this morning. Welcome to Thy Will Ministries and the Thy Will Ministries family, Thy Will Ministries Equipping Center. And we are glad that you're a part of this exciting journey that we are taking with the Lord in a most unprecedented time where we are creating history in a moment. And so God is outpouring in such a tremendous way. And I've been speaking to different ministers, and there is a likeness of what God is doing. And what's interesting is there is also a specific word that is echoed in different churches. And you know people who are aligned to what the Spirit is saying, because the word that has been declared in many churches is aligned to what we are sharing this morning. So we know we are in a good place. Proverbs tells us that through wisdom a house is built. Wisdom buildeth a house. Through wisdom a house is built. And by understanding it is established. And by knowledge shall the chambers be filled with all precious and pleasant riches. Go back to verse 3. Wisdom. Wisdom builds a house. Wisdom builds a house. The opposite of wisdom is ignorance. Ignorance, the inability coming to an understanding of something. To understand it is to comprehend it, to make sense of it. And so if there is no wisdom, the principal thing, there is no wisdom, a house cannot be established. It cannot be established. It has to take wisdom and understanding that has to come together, a twofold cord. It has to come together, knitted and weaved together, so that the house can be what? Established. Established. Right? Praying and fasting and all the other things have its place. It doesn't lose its place in the presence of what God is doing. But if you want to establish something that will stand the course of time and the course of history and made known, there are two things that has to come together, and that's wisdom to build a house and understanding to establish it. Are we ready for the word? Are you sure you're ready for the word? Usually I have to make a disclaimer before I start, right? So that you know some of the words can be very hard, but we're going into some stuff this morning. And I just love to shake your doctrine up a little bit and bring you into a place where there is a better understanding and challenge your theology in terms of what you know. So we're going to part 2. We are tracking the story with Abraham, and we are going into part 2 of this series, The Meeting Place of God. The Meeting Place of God. Well, a group of seminary students gathered in a chapel one day, and as the dean challenged them not to pray for a large church because of the stress, the problems, and the worries that go with a large church. So the next year, one of the students who graduated returned to give his testimony. He said, you know, I did ask God for a big church. However, I also asked God for a pretty wife. My prayer was almost answered. Instead of getting a big church and a pretty wife, I got a pretty church and a big wife. Right? Genesis 14:11 to 20. I'll ask them to switch if they have to switch. We go to Genesis 14:11 to 20. We are tracking between Genesis 12 to along Genesis 22 around there. And it says, so the enemy took all the possession of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abraham's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom and his possession, and they went away. So the enemy came, they took Lot away, they raided Sodom and Gomorrah. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew, Genesis 14:11, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Iskal and Anet. They were allies of Abram. And Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive. He led forth his trained men born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Verse 15 says, and he divided his forces against them by night. And he and his servant and defeated them and pursued them to Hobad, the north of Damascus. And he brought back all the possession and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possession and the woman and the people. And after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shiva, that is the king of the valley. And Melchizedek, I want to zero in on this, the king of Salem brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. And he gave him a tithe of all. Abraham had an impossible war against 4 kings to rescue his nephew Lot. On his way back, he comes in contact with a strange person by the name of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, which means the king of peace. He is a priest of the Most High God. He is also a priest of the God of Abram. But why would Abram, the father of faith, bow and give tribute to a total stranger that he meets on his way back? This is an act of acknowledging that there is a higher spiritual authority. So what Abraham did, he is admitting that Melchizedek is greater than he is, even though he's known as the father of faith. But who can be greater than Abraham in a moment and in a time of history? Melchizedek comes with no lineage, no father, no mother. He appears on the scene. As an Israelite, your identity is found in your family tree. You trace your identity in a family tree. That's why in the Gospels and in the Old Testament, there are genealogies tracking the lineage of people that is coming down. The law is clear. Only the descendants of Aaron's family, the Levi, can be priests. And it is a calling that comes down by blood. You have to be part of the family of Aaron, out of the tribe of Levi, before you can be a priest. But here is Melchizedek appearing on the scene, and he's the priest of the Most High God. But has no father, has no mother, has no lineage. It is just as Jesus enters into the scene, and he's the long-awaited Messiah. But Jesus is coming from the kingly tribe of Judea. Those that came down from the tribe of Judea is those that can be crowned king. Under the Bible's own law, Jesus could not be a high priest because he did not belong to the right tribe, and so he lacked the proper lineage to be a priest. He can be the king. That's why they inscribe of him the king of the Jews, but he cannot be a priest because he's not of the lineage of the Levi. He is not from the lineage and the genealogy of Aaron. He's coming from Judea. That's where David came from, and so he's ascribed as a king. There is a strict separation of powers. If you are from the tribe of Judah, you can be a king, but you can never be a priest. So this raises an interesting scenario. If you were from the tribe of Levi, you can be a priest, but you cannot be a king. The blending of the two offices, the king-priest, is illegal. You cannot be a priest and a king, and yet Melchizedek enters into the scene, and he is both king and priest. He's the king of peace, and he is the priest of the righteous God. He carries both titles in his hand. But Jesus can be a king and cannot be a priest. His genealogy disqualifies him. But how is he to save humanity? In order to save humanity, he must be a priest. In order to save mankind, he must come as a priest. How can he be our high priest if legally he does not meet the basic requirements? This poses the problem. The answer is found in Melchizedek. In Melchizedek. David writes a startling story, Psalms 10 and verse 4. I'm reading from the NIV. Psalms 10 and verse 4. The Lord has sworn, I will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. We scroll down to Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 3, and it says, he is without father, he is without mother, he is without genealogies, having no beginning of days or end of life. But like the Son of God, he remains a priest continually. Interestingly. In other words, Jesus is not a priest according to the order of Levi, which is a temporary base human heritage. He is a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. A superior priesthood, an order of divine decree that comes down from the throne room of God and does not come from the human lineage. Are we getting this? So when Jesus comes in the scene, he comes in just like Melchizedek. He comes in the scene from the tribe of Judah, which makes him legally to become a king. But he also comes from a decree that goes beyond human natures, a decree that is direct and divine. He comes from a priesthood that is superior, one that is linked to and destined like Melchizedek. He can hold both positions. And that allows him to pay the price. So what ushers in him? Melchizedek brings out bread and wine. Have a meal with him. And it is in that very likeness Jesus instituted the Last Supper with bread and wine. Melchizedek enters the narrative with no beginning or end on record, making him a perfect type of Christ. No beginning, no end. So it sets him as a symbol, as Christ. In fact, theologians believe that it was Christ who came as Melchizedek. It sets him as a typology, as Christ has no beginning, has no end, but sets him on an earthly realm as both priest and king. The figure in the form of Melchizedek was a foreshadow pointing to Jesus, establishing a precedent of an eternal priesthood. That's what it was. The superiority of this priesthood was evident when Abram, an ancestor of the Levitical priesthood, paid tribute. He paid a tithe to Melchizedek, the lesser giving honor to the greater. Can I tell you this? gives honor to Jesus, who sits as a high priest, our high priest, making intercession for us before the Father. I don't need to encourage you anymore. What your tithe does is that it gives honor. It recognizes that I am the least and you are the greater. It recognizes that you are greater than I am. And I am compelled to bring honor to you. I'm compelled to pay a tribute to you. So I come and give it to the high priest. You see, if we give it to the church, or we give it to the pastor, then we will never come into a place to give it. But when we recognize that when I give it to a high priest, Jesus himself will make it intercession for me before the Father, then we would have no problem. In other words, tap into the divine order of God. It is this order that Abraham recognizes, and he pays a tithe to it. He recognized that there is an order in Melchizedek. He recognized there is something about this man called Melchizedek that is greater than I am, that sets an order as a priest and a king. And so he gives honor to that. It's a divine order set by God. And the value that he placed in that honor was taking a tenth of all the spoil that he had, and he paid it to Melchizedek. Not that Melchizedek needed it, but Abraham knew within himself that I must give honor. And what do I have at my disposal is I have the spoils that is available to me, so I will pay a tithe to this greater order, because this greater order is a divine order set from the realms of the heaven. Are we getting this? The three boys was in the schoolyard. They were bragging about their fathers. And the first boy says, my dad can scribble a few words in a piece of paper, and he calls it a poem, and people will give him $50 for that. The second boy said, that's nothing, man. My dad scribbles a few words in a piece of paper. He calls it a song, and people will pay him $100 for that. The third boy looked at them and he says, guys, my dad scribbles a few words in a piece of paper. He calls it a sermon, and it takes 8 people to collect the money. Yeah. Genesis 22, 1-14. Let's track on. And it came to pass that after these things that God did tempt, he tested Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he says, behold, here I am. And he says, take now thy son, thy only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moab, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I shall tell thee of. I know we know the story. I want to read it to you. And Abraham rose up early in the morning. He saddled his ass, and he took 2 of the young men with him, Isaac his son. He took the wood for a burnt offering. He rose up and went to the place which God had told him. He comes unto the mountain of Moab. And on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes. There are some key things I want you to point out here. On the 3rd day, we're going to deal with this over this series. On the 3rd day is our resurrection day. On this 3rd day, it's a crucifixion day. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and he saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto the young man, abide here, you stay here with the ass. Be careful who you're staying back with. Amen. You stay here, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, but we will come again. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. Where did he lay the wood on? His son. Key things, we read this and we miss it. He took the wood that was meant for the sacrifice and he laid it on the sacrifice. When the sacrifice is being done, the lamb is laid on the wood. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father and said, my father? And he says, here am I, my son. He said, I see the fire, I see the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said something that will resound through the corridors of time. My son, God will provide himself. God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went, both of them together. And they came to the place where God had told him of. And Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order. And he bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took his knife to slay his son. Abraham is not flinching. He may be hurting, but he's not flinching. He's obedient at this point. And the angel of the Lord called upon him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he says, Here am I. And he says, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him, for now I know that when your obedience is being tested, when your faithfulness and walk with God is being tested, at which point are you going to give up? At which point are you going to say enough is enough? Because at the point when a knife is about to come down on his son, it is that very moment that God says, Now I know that thou fearest God. Did not God know Abraham's heart? Seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son from me. In other words, you are willing to give up whatever you have for me. Are we getting this? You are willing to give up whatever it takes for me. You cannot walk with me unless you are willing to give up what is more important to you. You are willing to give it up. This is your only son. I give you the son, but you are willing to give up that son because you see me as God more important than your son. That is obedience. Sometimes we feel we're walking with God. Lord, I'm going to give up a meal today. And whoo, that's a big sacrifice. Come on. But when it comes to the place where God says that there are other things that I want you to give up, God, you can take every area of my life, but please don't touch my bank account. You are hurting me, Lord. Verse 23, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram was caught in the thicket by his horn. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up as a burnt offering instead of his son, because an offering has to be made. If an altar is built, an offering has to be made. And Abraham called the name of that place, Jehovah-Jireh, the Lord our provider. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord, it has been seen. Now there's a perception. There is a perception here that I want you to see. There is something that I want to bring to light. Spiritual perception is knowledge which comes by the Spirit. Carnal perception is knowledge which comes by learning and experiences. Things that you would go through in life, you will have a certain perception of how you see life, of how you walk out life. It builds a perception of how you see people, how you understand things. And sometimes we have to move away from that and understand, because that's the fight we have between what comes from God, what comes from our spirit of how we're going to see it, and what comes from our experiences, from our hurts, what is causing us to make decisions. A perception of how we see things allows us to make decisions. The perception of how we see things is how we're going to walk out life. The perception of how we see people is going to determine how we're going to deal with them. A shoe manufacturing company decided that they were going to expand their business inside of the DR Congo in Africa. So they sent out 2 of their best salesmen to examine the business potentials. The first one responded, prospect is nil, because no one is wearing shoes here. The second salesman reported, the market potential is terrific. Everyone is barefooted and in desperate need of shoes. A perception of how you see it. Because if you see it wrong, you will live it wrong. Are you hearing me? If you see it wrong, you will live it wrong. Abram is lifted up from where he was from Abram to Abraham, and reveals several lessons that we can apply to our lives. We're going to deal with the personal call, the promised son, the prepared place, and the perfect provisions. That's how far we can go this morning. Genesis 13, 7 to 8 in the NIV. I'm giving you all some work. Genesis 13, 7 to 8 in the NIV. And quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and Lot's herdsmen. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. We're moving around in this story. So Abram, in fact, said to Lot, this is before he goes to offer his son. He's there, and they set their tent. And after a while, there was big confusion, quarreling, taking place between the people that Lot has, all his herdsmen and Abraham men. And Abraham said to Lot, let not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are close relatives. How many of you know that we are a family in this house? Did you miss what I just read there? There is a quarrel between the herdsmen of Lot, and there is a quarrel between the herdsmen of Abram. There's a quarrel with the men who are tending the sheep outside there, the sheep outside there rather. And Abraham comes to Lot and he says, let us not have a quarrel between you and me, or between your herdsmen and my herdsmen. The contention that is there in the environment, it should not really bother us. Are we going somewhere with this? Because too many times we like to get involved in people's business. We learned last week that Lot means veil, hidden, covered, hollow. He has no vision. He has no insight about the things of God. He's making decision on what his eye sees. And there are always going to be a lot of Lots in the house of God. He could not see what Abraham represented. He's showing a lack of vision, no depth in his walk with God. He's comfortable in a place of contention. He doesn't go to Abraham and says, let's solve this problem. He's very comfortable in the contention. He's very comfortable in the quarrel. But Abraham comes to him and says, why are we quarreling? He allows the contention and the quarrels of the herdsmen to damage his relationship with Abraham. And it is Abraham who saves his life. It is Abraham who takes him as a nephew and is taking care of him and carrying him on a journey. It is Abraham who gives him sheep and cattle that he can take care of and he can build his own life. And when contention happens amongst the men and there is quarrel around them, he has absolutely no problem with that. It damages his relationship with Abraham, and he's very comfortable in that place. Because some of us like the contention. We like the gossip. We like to be a part of it. That's our lifestyle. And it damages relationship, and there can be no family. Never, never, never allow the tension of others to become the strife that you will inherit. Are you hear what I'm saying? Don't allow the strife of others to become your strife. You don't inherit it. Abraham, as a spiritual father, Abraham, who is looking after, he says, let there be no strife among us. Why are you allowing this, Lot? Separate yourself. And he allows Lot to choose first. What's the heart of Abraham? Abraham treats Lot as a son, but Lot continues to display his attitude as a nephew. He treats him as a son, and he says, okay, let's separate yourself. You choose what you want. But Lot continues. Chapter 13, verses 9 to 10, and it says, is not the whole land before you? Let us part company. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. And if you go to the right, I will go to the left. Let there be no problem between us. Lot looks around and he saw that the whole plain of Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like gardens of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. He's making decisions based on where he's coming from. That was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of Jordan, and he set out towards east, and the two men parted companies. Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot dwelt among the cities of the plain and pitched his tent near Sodom. And now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So Lot appraises the land and he chooses out of sight, and he has no honor, he has no respect for Abraham, and he chooses the best land. He chooses out of his natural sight because he has no spiritual insight and he has no divine perception. The nature in which he walks in is one of no vision, one that is veiled, one that is shadow. And that is what commanded his footsteps, and that is what allows him to make his decision. And the moment that Lot separates himself from Abraham, the Bible says that the voice of the Lord came unto Abraham a second time. And it is at that moment God changes his name from Abraham, an exalted father, to Abraham, a father of many nations. He inserted the fifth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. He inserted that H there. And that 5 is a representation of grace. So he's not just imparting grace, he's elevated in grace. But herein is the problem. Lot never saw the Abraham in the Abraham. There is no divine perception. He never saw what Abraham was carrying. He operated in his own sight and he missed the blessing that will come from Abraham. You have to learn to see the Israel in the Jacob. You have to learn to see the Abraham in the Abram. When you leave a spiritual father prematurely, you forfeit all that God has destined for you. Do not be conditioned by what you see now. If you do not appreciate the level of grace that you receive now, when a spiritual father is elevated, you will not be able to receive what he has then. Are you hearing what I'm saying? And because he was functioning out of the natural, it was easy for him to walk away from his divine destiny. He positioned his tent towards Sodom. He chose the best land and positioned his tent towards Sodom. You see, I can tell you this morning that when you move from spiritual fathering, there is always an inclination of your heart to draw you further and further away from God. Because what you focus on will take your attention. The next time we hear about Lot, he's no longer in the tent in the plains of the Jordan. He's in Sodom and Gomorrah. As long as Lot was with Abram, it brought restraint to his heart. Because a spiritual father will bring restraint to your life. It doesn't matter how spiritual or mature you think you are, without the oversight of a spiritual father, there is a great potential for you to fall. This is strong, yes. But I'm giving you truth. I don't want you to feel that I'm not putting water in my mouth to talk to you. I will put water in. In Genesis 19, Lot is now at the gate of Sodom and Gomorrah. He's at the gate of Sodom, and by this time, Lot is involved in Sodom, and he finds himself as an elder at the gate. And only elders sit at the gate because they influence culture and law. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 to 8, it says, "And if he rescued Lot, a righteous man, who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless, for that righteous man lived among them day after day, was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deed he saw and he heard." In other words, he may not have participated in their deeds, but his soul was tormented day after day. You cannot participate in some of the things of this world. You cannot allow it to entertain you because it's going to draw you in. You cannot be entertained by something God's abhorred. Lot literally had no resource within himself to stand up against the culture of evil that was before him because he had no divine perception. So he had no influence of the evil that was before him. He was in the city, but he was powerless to influence it. It's the same culture that influenced his children. There was absolutely no restraint, and they themselves made decision on sight. When a father fails, the home falls. We're going to continue this. I'm going to stop on a personal call to Abraham as we continue this message.
On behalf of Reverend Vishnu and Pastor Vishnu Seepersad, thanks for watching. We hope to see you again next week.